Kaufman.
And I'm Lisa Damaris.
And this is Appraiser Talk, the show where I ask Lisa, the Vice President of Appraisal Issues at the Appraisal Foundation, your appraisal questions.
We answer questions from every corner of the appraisal profession, from consumers to appraisers and real estate to business valuation.
Welcome to today's episode. Today we are joined by Appraiser Qualifications Board Chair Brad Swinney. Welcome back to the show, Brad.
Thanks. It's great to be here.
Here's our question for the week. How does the degree review program work?
First, I should explain what it is and what it does. AQB's degree review program is a free service provided for the benefit of state appraiser boards, colleges and universities, and graduates of real estate degree programs. The degree review program analyzes real estate degree programs and degree programs in other areas, such as management, agricultural finance, with a real estate focus or minor to determine hours of creditable qualifying education toward an appraisal credential they may merit. This free program benefits states by freeing them of the need to dedicate time and staffing in analysis of these degree programs for hours of qualifying education themselves. It helps participating colleges and universities by providing another benefit to the degrees they offer. And the real estate degree review program also certainly benefits the graduates of approved degree programs by relieving them of the requirement to obtain most of their qualifying education toward an appraisal credential twice, once via their degree and again via an AQB or state-approved qualifying education source. AQB members perform this analysis on any degree program submitted for review by an accredited college or university. Applications for submission to the program are found on the TAF website under Resources, Aspiring Appraisers, Real Estate Degree Review Program. You may also find a list of currently approved degree programs on this webpage. AQB currently has 49 approved programs, 16 graduate programs, 32 bachelor programs, and 1 associate program. Jalen Debonnaire is the Appraisal Foundation staff member responsible for helping applicants submit degree programs for review, and her contact information is found on the program page. Colleges and universities submitting real estate degree programs to AQB for analysis need to provide the following information before the analysis can be completed. For the program, we need the title of the degree program, program hours, semester or quarter hours, course description with list of required courses, elective courses, and prerequisite courses, and contact information for AQB follow-up information requests. For each course, we need a course syllabus and a timed course outline, unless that timed course outline is already contained within the supplied syllabus. I should explain that the timed course outline is necessary to convert semester or quarters hours to classroom hours of qualifying education because the real property appraiser qualification criteria indicates required qualifying education in terms of classroom hours. Finally, during the course of these analyses, follow-up questions from AQB to the applicants are very common. Therefore, the contact provided by the applying college or university often proves critical to timely completion of the analysis. Amy and Lisa, that wraps up my quick overview of AQB's Real Estate Degree Review Program.
Thank you so much, Brad, and thank you so much to our listeners for joining us today. We hope you'll tune in each week to Appraiser Talk. You can send in your questions to me at Amy, A-M-Y, at appraisalfoundation.org, and you might just hear us answer it in a future episode.
And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss an episode. Appraiser Talk is available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. All right. Looks like the podcast is completed. Can everybody hear me okay?
We can.
Great. All right, let's get going then. So welcome, everybody. Thank you, as always, for joining us here today. Today, we have the chair and the vice chair of the Appraiser Qualifications Board, and they are going to be discussing the very important current exposure draft for proposed changes to the criteria and its 2 associated concept papers. Jerry and Valerie, would you like to introduce yourselves?
Absolutely. Hello, everybody. We're really glad you're here. Again, I am Jerry Urich, the chair of the Appraisal Qualifications Board, and I'm a certified residential appraiser, and I'm based in Cincinnati, Ohio. I've been a practicing appraiser for over 35 years, and I'm presently employed by a large national bank.
Good morning or afternoon, depending on your location. Thank you for your time attending this webinar. I am Valerie Scott, the current Vice Chair of the Appraiser Qualifications Board. I am a certified general appraiser based in Capitan, New Mexico. I have been practicing appraisal for almost 21 years and have been employed with a large farm credit institution.
Great. Thank you, both of you. And I am Lisa Damaris, the Vice President of Appraisal Issues at the Appraisal Foundation. I serve as the technical expert to the AQB, and I was an appraiser in the field for 30 years before I came to work here full time. So just super quickly, before we begin, and I hand this over to Jerry and Valerie, as always, a few quick housekeeping notes I'm going to run through. We're going to be recording the webinar, and you should see the recording post in our website and YouTube channel in less than approximately 24 hours. We will take questions at the end of the webinar, so type those in at any point because we're going to be reading those out, and Jerry and Valerie are going to go through as best as possible. All you have to do is go down to the bottom of your screen, find the Q&A thing, and type them in there. And also, we recommend you keep the chat box open because there's always links and other information that we put in there. At the conclusion of the webinar, after we log off, you get this very, 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 very quick survey. We always just ask you, what did you like? What didn't you like? Because we change things based on the feedback that we get. So with that, let's get started. Jerry, can you tell us what the attendees should expect from today's webinar?
Absolutely. Thank you, Lisa. So before we dive in, I want to spend a minute setting expectations for today's discussion and clarifying how this webinar is just a little different from the one the board held in December. So back in December, the full AQB walked through the exposure draft and the two concept papers largely at a high level. That webinar was a public meeting where the focus was on introducing the documents and outlining what was being released for comment. Today's conversation builds on that. You'll still hear us referencing the same three documents released on December 5th. That is the first exposure draft proposing changes to the real property appraiser qualification criteria and the two related concept papers. But instead of repeating what was already said, our goal today is to spend more time on the why behind those documents. We want to explain more of the board's thinking, the considerations that shaped the proposals, and how the different pieces all fit together. This includes the rationale behind certain decisions, the trade-offs that were discussed, and the questions the board still has and we're actively seeking input on. You'll notice that this session is going to be more interactive. As we move through the material, we're going to pause and ask you some quick questions along the way. These aren't going to be complicated questions. Most of these will be yes or no or short responses that you can type directly into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. That real-time feedback is helpful to the board, and it does help us understand how these ideas are landing with stakeholders as we go. So with that in mind, let's start by briefly grounding ourselves in the exposure draft, and then we'll move into the concept papers and the reasoning behind them. All right, to understand how we arrived at this exposure draft, it really helps to take a step back to the very beginning of this project. This effort did not start with a single proposal or a single document. It began when the board recognized that the real property appraiser qualification criteria had evolved over many years through incremental changes, often in response to specific issues, market events, or regulatory needs. Over time, that approach made the criteria more complex and, as you probably guessed, in some places, harder to interpret and apply consistently. So if you look at the earlier exposure draft and the reference material that accompanied it, you'll see that the board laid out a clear rationale for why a broader reassessment was needed. So the central question was whether the criteria, taken as a whole, still reflects only what is essential for someone to be minimally qualified to practice appraisal today. That earlier material explains that the board was not trying to fix one isolated problem. Instead, it recognized that education, experience, examinations, and definitions are all interconnected. Adjusting one piece without looking at the others could create confusion or unintended consequences, particularly for state regulators and applicants. That realization shaped the structure of this project. The board intentionally started with research, historical context, and foundational questions about purpose and function. And then from there, it identified specific areas that warranted deeper explanation, which is why you saw concept papers issued before this exposure draft and why additional concept papers are being issued alongside it. Only after that groundwork was established did the board move into a more targeted analysis to test assumptions and better understand how to proceed with a project of this size. That layered approach is what ultimately led to the proposals you see in this exposure draft. So, what are we reviewing here is not really the result of a single study or a single meeting. It reflects a multi-stage process that began with asking fundamental questions about the criteria themselves and then methodically building towards specific proposed changes. So before Valerie starts to walk us through the proposed changes, I want to briefly frame how this next section is going to be structured. The exposure draft includes a number of proposed revisions, but they are not random or disconnected. They fall into a few clear categories. Also, today's presentation is not a line-by-line explanation of the draft. For those that have read all the way through it, you can see that it's over 128 pages. So it's a lot to go through. So it's not something that we're going to go through line by line here today. But the goal here is to give you enough context to understand what the board is proposing and why these areas were targeted for proposed change within the criteria. As we go through this, keep in mind that real and full details live in the documents themselves. This overview is really meant to help you read those documents more effectively so that you can understand how to navigate through the documents and know what it is you are seeing. With that, we'll start by walking through the key proposals. Valerie, over to you.
Thank you, Jerry. The key proposal areas can generally be put into 4 categories. First, education-related changes. Next, experience-related changes. Third, examination-related changes. And last, structural and clarity improvements. These 4 areas capture the substance of what's being proposed. I'll start with the education-related proposals. The exposure draft proposes removing all college course and college degree requirements for the certified residential and certified general credentials. This proposal reflects extensive review of public comment, studying past decisions made by prior AQB boards, and research on whether general degree requirements are tied to appraisal competency or public trust. The board concluded that competency is best built through appraisal-specific education, structured experience, and examination rather than through general college academic coursework. The board is proposing to remove college-related requirements, but as I will explain in just a moment, to increase qualifying education requirements for CR and CG credentials. The board is seeking feedback on whether this approach removes unnecessary barriers while still supporting confidence in minimum qualifications needed to become an appraiser.
Hey, Valerie, before we move on, I'd like to take a quick sense of the room, if it's all right. So for those on the call, do you generally agree or disagree with removing college course and degree requirements for certified residential and certified general appraisers, assuming appraisal-specific education is strengthened? So if you could, type agree or disagree in the Q&A box for us, please. Excellent, seeing a lot of responses, so thank you. Keep bringing those in, so I'd like to see a response from everybody if we could. All right.
Well, while individuals are filling that out, thank you, Jerry. And related to the removal of the college-related requirements, the exposure draft proposes targeted increases to qualifying education requirements for the certified residential and certified general credentials. These increase focus on market analysis, data analytics, and applied case studies. These areas were identified as points where new entrants often struggle and where more focused appraisal-specific instruction would be more effective than broad or elective coursework. The intent is to strengthen education where it directly supports how appraisers analyze markets and support conclusions. Jerry, do you want to take the next one?
Happy to. Thanks, Valerie. The exposure draft also proposes a clarification related to continuing education requirements for trainee appraisers. Under the proposed revisions, individuals holding the trainee appraiser classification would not be required to complete continuing education while they remain in that classification. One reason for this proposal is to address inconsistencies across states. States are not required to offer a trainee appraiser classification, and as you might know, some do not. In those jurisdictions, individuals pursuing licensure are not subject to continuing education requirements at the trainee level because the classification itself really doesn't even exist. This proposal aligns the criteria with how those states already operate today without apparent issues. The board also recognized that the trainee classification can be held for an extended period of time. In practice, some individuals may spend several years completing education and experience requirements before moving forward. Requiring continuing education during that period adds an ongoing burden without a clear connection to competency developed at that stage. And finally, the board considered public trust implications. Trainee appraisers do not perform appraisal work independently, as you know. All of their appraisal activities must be supervised or reviewed in some way and are otherwise subject to appropriate oversight. So for that reason, the board did not identify a public trust concern associated with removing continuing education requirements at the trainee level. Overall, this proposal is intended to promote consistency and reduce unnecessary burden. So Valerie, back to you.
Thank you, Jerry. Another education-related proposal removes elective coursework from qualifying education requirements. Currently, to gain a CR or a CG credential, that person needs to take very specifically defined qualifying education courses. And within that list of specific courses, they also have to take a specified number of electives, meaning they get to choose what courses they want to fill those remaining 12 or 22 course hours. Because elective hours result in wide variation in content, that means there's a little consistency in what applicants were actually learning for those hours. The board concluded that these hours did not meaningfully contribute to what it means to have consistent minimum qualifications. By removing electives, all required coursework is focused on clearly identified competencies tied directly to appraisal practice.
So I have another quick question on this one for our attendees. From your perspective, have requirements for certified residential and certified general appraisers to take elective qualifying education hours been helpful in preparing appraisers? Or have they mostly added variability without much benefit? So if you could, answer either helpful or not helpful in the Q&A for us, please. All right, good, some great responses, thank you. And I'll back to that.
Yes, keep those coming in. We'll continue. Several proposals address how the national examination fits into the qualification process. Currently, one can only sit for the national exam after they have met all their other qualifying requirements, including having completed all their required experience hours. The exposure draft would now allow applicants to take the examination before, during, or after completing experience, as long as all of their qualifying education is complete. Proposed changes would also remove timing restrictions that caused passing exam results to expire.
And so to keep things interactive, again, I have another quick question for all of our attendees. Do you see value in allowing applicants to take the exam earlier in the process, or do you think the current sequencing works better? So if you could, just type either earlier or current in the Q&A box for us, please. Okay.
All right.
Back to you, Valerie.
Again, keep those coming in and we'll continue. The exposure draft proposes reducing the minimum time frame for completing certified residential experience from 12 months to 9 months. This challenge aligns the certified residential credential with the proportional framework already used for licensed residential and certified general credentials. The total required experience hours remain unchanged. This proposal is about consistency across the credentials, not reducing experience expectations.
And one thing I'd like to add is if this change were adopted, it would, for lack of a better term, mathematically make more sense for everybody. So remember, the licensed residential is required to complete 1,000 hours of experience in no fewer than 6 months. Certified general is required to complete 3,000 hours of experience in no fewer than 18 months. So, since the certified residential is required to have 1,500 hours of experience, consistency means the minimum number of months should be 9 and not 12. Valerie?
Next, the exposure draft adds a clearer and more detailed definition of practicum programs directly into the criteria. Just like Korea, this exposure draft is proposing a much more robust and detailed definition of practicum, so as to help states better understand what, at a minimum, the AQB intends a practicum program should look like. This makes it easier for states to approve practicum programs. We also have the introduction of 2 new experience pathways. The exposure draft proposes 2 new experience allowances. One allows experience gained in legally confidential environments, such as certain federal agencies, to be credited when appropriate verification is available. The other allows experience gained under international valuation standards to be considered when it can be shown to be equivalent to USPAP in scope and complexity. Also, mass appraisal experience, we are clarifying the path verification. Mass appraisal experience is already permitted under the current criteria, but states do understandably still raise concerns about how that experience can be verified. The exposure draft proposes clearer methods for verifying mass appraisal experience that reflect how that work is actually performed.
And for those of you who work in regulation or assessment, do you think clear guidance on verifying mass appraisal experience address a real change you faced? So in the Q&A box, if you could type a yes or a no, and maybe even some quick rationale, that would be very helpful. So if you'd add that to the Q&A box, either yes or no, along with any quick rationale you'd like to add. And thank you.
All right. Next, finally, the exposure draft allows states to pause or extend required timeframes when applicants experience extenuating circumstances that force them to stop progressing toward a credential. This responds directly to state requests for limited flexibility in situations outside an applicant's control while maintaining minimum qualification standards. That covers the major proposal areas in our exposure draft. Each topic is explained in detail in the document itself, and the board encourages you to focus your comments on the areas most relevant to your experience.
Well, all right, thanks, Valerie. So now we'll go on to the proposed reorganization of the criteria. So the entire document has been reorganized from the top to bottom and written using federal plain language writing guidelines. Over time, some felt the criteria had become difficult to navigate, with requirements spread across sections and written in ways that could lead to inconsistent interpretation. This reorganization was done to make the criteria easier to read, easier to apply, and easier to administer, particularly for state regulators and educators who rely on the document every day. Another proposed change involved definitions. Definitions that were previously scattered throughout the document have been consolidated into a single section. In many cases, definitions were actually added, or even just clarified or refined to resolve long-standing confusion or apparent inconsistencies. This change responds directly to repeated questions from regulators and stakeholders who struggled to determine which definition applied in a given situation.
All right. The exposure draft also clarifies supervisory and trainee terminology and requirements. This includes clearer language around who is considered a supervisory appraiser and what it means to provide supervision. I also want to take a moment to clarify one point that has been in the criteria for a long time, but has not always been very well understood. The criteria has, for a very long time now, allowed states to permit a supervisory appraiser to supervise more than 3 trainee appraisers, provided that the state has a program in place that includes specific requirements for progress monitoring, supervisory appraiser qualifications, and oversight. That allowance is not new. What the exposure draft does is make this clearer and more explicit because we continue to hear questions about whether supervising more than 3 trainees is permitted at all. The answer is even now, yes, but only when additional safeguards are in place. The revisions are intended to make that distinction easier to see and apply, and to reduce confusion about what is allowed versus what requires a structured state program.
Super, thanks, Valerie. Now, finally, the draft includes document-wide technical and terminology alignment. This means correcting outdated references, aligning terminology over sections, and resolving small technical issues that accumulated over time as the criteria evolved. None of these types of changes alter the requirements per se. Rather, their purpose is to make the criteria function as a single, coherent document rather than a collection of amendments layered on top of one another. So, Valerie?
All right, it's my turn to ask the question now, Jerry. Quick question for the audience. For those of you who work directly with the criteria, whether as regulators, educators, or credential applicants, would clearer organization and consolidation definitions make the document easier to use in practice? A simple yes or no in the Q&A box would be perfect.
All right, as they start to answer that, I see lots of coming in. Thank you very much. Again, now, before we move on, I want to pause for a moment and take a step back from the individual proposals. So throughout this section, we've asked a few very quick questions just to get an initial sense of where you land on some of the specific ideas in the exposure draft. What I'd like to do now is ask a broader question that really cuts across all of them. So as you think about the proposals as a whole, do they create a criteria that represents true minimum qualifications for today's appraisal practice? Or do you think there are areas where more things should change or fewer things should change? If you are willing, we'd really value a little more context in your response. For example, you might think about whether the draft does a better job of focusing on competency rather than credentials, whether it improves clarity and consistency for regulators and applicants, or whether there are specific proposals that give you pause. There are no right or wrong answers here. This is exactly the kind of perspective the board is looking at in this stage. Please feel free to share your thoughts in the Q&A box. Even a few sentences are helpful. And as you fill those out, and again, we really do appreciate all the responses. We're seeing a lot of them, so this is super. Now let's go ahead and turn our focus to one of the 2 concept papers that we released alongside the exposure draft. I want to very briefly explain what this concept paper is and what it is not. The skills-based pathway concept paper does not propose changes to the criteria. Instead, it documents an idea the board examined because it continued to surface during public comment and stakeholder discussions. The purpose of the concept paper is to explain why the idea comes up, what it would potentially be trying to solve, and what challenges would have to be addressed before anything like this could be considered being feasible pathway. In other words, this paper is about transparency and asking you questions. not advancing a proposal.
Thanks, Jerry. And what I want to do now is to walk through how the board approached this topic and what the concept paper is intended to do. As the paper explains, the AQB already allows multiple ways to obtain experience under the criteria, including the supervisor trainee model, practicum programs, and PAREA. Even with these options, stakeholders continue to ask whether additional pathways might be possible. The idea most often raised is what people refer to as a skills-based or competency-based pathway. Generally, this means a model that would recognize demonstrated capability rather than relying primarily on experience that is based on completing USPAP-compliant appraisal reports. Because this idea came up repeatedly and from many different groups, the board believed it was important to examine it carefully. We spent serious time diving into this issue, but the reason you see a concept paper and not a proposed change in the criteria is the board was not able to reach a point where this looked feasible. Therefore, the overview section of the concept paper explains that the board's goal was not to decide whether a skills-based pathway should exist, but to identify the questions that would need to be answered before such a pathway could responsibly be considered or proposed by the AQB. The questions we ask in the concept paper include how competency would be demonstrated, how experience would be verified, how standards and ethics would be enforced, and how state regulators could apply such a model consistently. This context is important as we move into the specific considerations discussed in the remainder of the paper.
All right, well, before I walk through what the board found, I want to start with another question for you. When you hear the phrase skills-based pathway, what do you assume the experience is being measured against? Is it measured against a defined standard? Is it reviewed by someone who is accountable? And can a regulator independently verify that the work actually demonstrates competency? Those questions are at the heart of what the board examined. As the board looked more closely at this concept, several key findings emerged. First, appraisal experience today is not evaluated in the abstract. It's evaluated against a standard framework. Under the current criteria, experience is tied to appraisal assignments that must comply with USPAP. That matters because USPAP provides a common, enforceable benchmark for ethics, competency, and credibility. When experience is earned through a supervisor, a practicum program, or PAREA, the work product can be reviewed. It can be audited. It can be compared against a known standard, USPAP. And the individuals, that means the supervisors, the instructors, and the mentors, are all appraisers who are subject to regulatory oversight. If they don't act ethically and comply with USPAP, they can be subject to discipline against their credential. In contrast, a skills-based pathway often assumes experience that occurs outside of appraisal practice itself. When that happens, the first challenge is verification. Who's confirming that the work occurred? Who's evaluating whether the work meets professional standards? And what authority does a regulator have over the person making that verification? Without a defined standard like USPAP anchoring the evaluation, regulators are placed in an untenable position. They would be asked to assess experience without a consistent yardstick. One reviewer's interpretation of competent could differ significantly from another's, not just across states, but within the same jurisdiction. So this creates real regulatory risk. States are required to apply the criteria consistently, fairly, and defensively. If experience cannot be verified against an enforceable standard, the result is subjectivity, inconsistency, and increased exposure to challenge. Another finding was that skills, in isolation, do not capture the full scope of appraisal practice. Appraisal is not a checklist of tasks. It involves professional judgment exercised within an ethical framework, under assignment conditions, with documentation sufficient for another appraiser or regulator to understand what was done and why. Finally, the board concluded that while the idea of a skills-based pathway responds to legitimate concerns about access and flexibility, the lack of a clear verification mechanism and a standards-based framework present significant obstacles that, at this time, the board felt could not be resolved. So for these reasons, the board did not propose a skills-based pathway in this criteria revision. Instead, it issued this concept paper to be transparent about the findings and to invite informed feedback on whether and how these challenges could be addressed. So if you like this idea, we really need your help to understand how in practice you believe this option could work. And thus, as always, your input is especially important. Back to you, Valerie.
Great. Thank you, Jerry. Our second concept paper is the introduction of a potential examination-only pathway. This second concept paper that was released alongside the exposure draft looks at another idea that surfaces from time to time, which is what some stakeholders refer to as an examination-only pathway. Or while the AQB is not aware of a definition for this term, we hear people refer to this idea as a super exam. Similar to the skills-based paper, this concept paper does not propose changes to the criteria. Instead, it documents a topic the board examined during its reassessment work, but ultimately did not advance as a proposal. The paper explains why the idea comes up, what assumptions it makes about how competency could be demonstrated, and what questions would need to be answered before something like an examination-only pathway could be responsibly considered. The board is sharing this analysis to stakeholders so stakeholders can respond to the real issues involved, rather than reacting to a hypothetical proposal. The second concept paper focuses on the idea of an examination-only pathway, which is sometimes described as allowing someone to qualify for a credential primarily or entirely through passing an examination. This idea tends to surface during conversations about access to experience, particularly when people raise concerns about the availability of supervisors or the time required to complete experience under the current models. As the board examined this concept, it became clear that the idea rests on a key assumption that an examination could serve as a substitute for experience in demonstrating minimum competency. The purpose of this concept paper is to step back and examine that assumption. It explains that the current national examination is designed to do what it is not designed to do, and why replacing experience with an exam raises significant questions from a regulatory and public trust perspective. Like the skills-based paper, this document does not propose changes to the criteria. Instead, it lays out the background, the reasoning, and the challenges the board identified so stakeholders can respond to the concept in an informed way. This framing is important as we move into the specific considerations discussed in the paper. Jerry?
All right. Oh, thank you. So before I talk about what the board found, once again, I want to start with a question for you. When people suggest an examination-only pathway, what do they expect that examination to prove? Is the goal to test knowledge of appraisal theory, or is it to demonstrate the ability to actually perform appraisal work in compliance with professional standards? That distinction is critical. As the concept paper explains, the current national examination is designed to test understanding of appraisal principles, methodology, and standards at a defined level of knowledge after the individual has completed their experience. It's a multiple choice exam developed and validated to measure whether a candidate understands the concepts required so they can become minimally qualified. What the exam is not designed to do is observe applied performance ethics, or judgment. It does not show how someone develops an appraisal assignment from start to finish. It does not show how they identify a problem, define scope of work, handle data limitations, reconcile approaches, or produce a USPAP compliant appraisal report. Those competencies are demonstrated today through experience pathways, not through examination. The board also examined what an examination-only pathway would actually require if the goal remained the same, which is ensuring that credentialed appraisers are minimally qualified to produce credible USPAP compliant work. The finding was that an exam capable of replacing experience would have to look fundamentally different from the current national exam. It would likely require extended case studies, performance-based assessments, or multi-stage evaluations that observe judgment, analysis, and reporting, not just knowledge. That raises practical and regulatory concerns. Who would design such an exam? Who would maintain and update it over the time? How would it be validated? And who would bear responsibility for its ongoing administration and cost? We sincerely seek your feedback and thoughts on these exact questions. We are looking for feasible solutions, and we really do need your ideas and thoughts. Another finding discussed in the concept paper relates to state authority. You may remember Title 11 of FIREA does not require states to use the AQB-produced national examination. Those states currently do rely on the AQB-supported exam, namely because developing and maintaining a defensible licensing exam is extremely time-consuming. It's very costly, and it's also very resource-intensive. Even the seemingly simple multiple-choice national exam that applicants currently take. An examination-only pathway would place an even greater demand on states or other entities, with no clear indication that such an exam could realistically be developed or sustained. Finally, the board concluded that existing experience pathways already address many of the concerns that drive interest in an examination-only model. We're talking programs like PAREA and Practicum. Those are specifically designed to bridge the gap between theory and practice and to produce work products that can be reviewed and verified. They're both gaining steam as viable alternatives to gaining experience, and the exposure draft even proposed 2 more experience pathways. And it seems to make it easier for states to understand how to approve mass appraisal experience. So for these reasons, the board decided not to propose an examination-only pathway in this criteria revision. Instead, it issued this concept paper to be transparent about the analysis and, more importantly, to invite feedback on whether this is an area that should be studied further in the future. And that's important. That feedback's really important, but it needs to be grounded in a clear understanding of what examinations can realistically measure and what minimum qualification is intended to represent. Well, we've covered a lot of material today, and we recognize that there's a lot to take in. Between the exposure draft and the 2 concept papers, there's a significant amount of information. And our goal today was to give you context and explain how the board approached these topics, not to rush you to any conclusions. At this point, we'd really like to hear from you. If you have specific questions, please feel free to put those in the Q&A box. And if you have comments, reactions, or concerns rather than formal question, that's perfectly fine as well. You don't need to frame it in a certain way. This is the time for us to hear what's standing out to you, what's unclear, or what you think the board should be paying closer attention to as it reviews feedback. So please go ahead, use the Q&A box to share your thoughts. And now, Lisa, are there any questions in the Q&A box that Valerie and I might be able to answer? Or have you already answered all of them while we were talking?
I just want to say there are literally hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of comments coming in the Q&A and the chat box. So thank you. So what I did was, just so everybody knows, I was thanking everybody, and then I realized this would take me forever. So I just put dismiss, because all of that data will go to the AQB and they will be reading it and looking at it. But I did save a couple for you, Jerry, and let me go through one right now. Let's just, since you were just talking about the exam, why don't we go to this question first?
Sure.
Somebody says, where's all this information about the exam come from? How many exam professionals does the AQB consult with? They don't sound very informed about how they develop the exam.
Well, we actually do have a lot of great resources tied to the national exam currently that we have, and that's at this point it's PSI, which is our exam support and developer. They don't just develop examinations for the AQB and the national exam, but they also develop exams for many different professions, and so they have a lot of standing. They've been very much involved in different credentials for different professions. So they've been able to aggregate and provide a lot of data that we use when we look at the performance of the examination that we have currently. And also, they gave us feedback again on other exams that they develop and how they relate, as well as, feedback on, an exam only pathway. So we've got a lot of feedback from them as well. So hope that helps.
Perfect. Thank you, Jerry.
Yeah.
And I did have several people bring up this topic about competency versus minimum qualifications. They just wanted to make sure you are not in the business of determining competency. So if you could explain that a little bit more.
Sure. Valerie, you want to do that one?
Sure, I read that one in the box as well,
Yeah.
and what I'm assuming was where we were talking about the skills-based or competency-based pathway, and the answer to that is we're talking about competency here differently than you're talking. The individual, I assume, is talking about competency to take on a certain assignment in USPAP. So what we're saying is that we are looking at a skills-based where you're competent to do certain portions of an appraisal and gain those skills that way in certain specific areas on actually writing an appraisal. As far as needing to be competent to analyze data, you need to be competent in order to write in good sentence structure. So those are the type of competency that is brought up in our concept paper in the skills-based area, not if you're competent to take on a certain specific appraisal assignment like USPAP discusses.
Thanks, Valerie.
Thank you. Okay. Next question. Will the AQB be making any forthcoming changes to deal with the lack of supervisory appraisers?
This is something we hear quite often about, difficulties in getting supervisory appraisers. Well, guess what? There are two great pathways to help with that already that AQB has worked on. And that is, again, the practical applications in real estate appraisal, which is an excellent pathway for aspiring appraisers that aren't able to find a supervisory appraiser, as well as practicum courses, our practicum programs. There are a number of practicum programs that are available currently, and I know that a lot of folks are looking at those, as well as more might being developed. Obviously, even on the farm credit side and ag side of it, they have also come out with a great outline for a practicum program. So I can tell you that there are currently options to finding a way to get into this profession without having a supervisor. But I can tell you that even after you've if you go down those pathways, the more interaction you have with your peers in this profession, the better, because you don't know what you don't know, and if you're able to have a great network of peers, that certainly helps you throughout your entire career. I know it's helped me quite a bit as I've grown into this profession too. So,
thank you. Next one. What does mass appraisal experience mean to you?
Valerie, you want to try that one?
Sure.
It doesn't mean you're
Mass
going to church,
appraisal.
right?
Oh, I was going to say, mass appraisal experience, when we talk about it, comes to mind on how different assessment districts in different counties across the U.S. are handling appraisals of certain properties for tax specific reasons when they're analyzing a larger data set at one time. That's how we're interpreting the mass appraisal experience. Jerry, do you have anything to add on that?
No, I completely agree, and it's something that currently within the criteria, mass appraisal experience is acceptable. I think that the important thing to point out here is that we have tried to give some additional focus on mass appraisal because we've heard that, from, jurisdiction to jurisdiction, state to state, it's not consistently applied in terms of the experience, and some states may not even accept it, which is unfortunate. But we're trying to make sure that everyone knows. Look, mass appraisal is a pathway, is to get experience to enter this profession. So,
great, thank you. This goes back to the skills-based pathway in that concept paper. Is it possible for the AQB to create the minimum yardstick and create that list of skills that somebody needs to become an appraiser?
Ooh, I'll tackle the first part of this, and Valerie, if you want to jump in too. So, this is one area that we struggle with. I mean, we have a lot of ideas, just as the board, but what we really want in this particular concept paper is to hear from you and say, well, what does that experience look like? What are the different things that you think are important or that should be considered for a skills-based pathway, and why? And then how are those measurable? I think, again, that's still the most important thing that we've pointed out in this concept, is that how do we create a yardstick? What does the yardstick look like, and how is it fairly administered across every jurisdiction? So again, a lot of unanswered questions with this one, and that's why it's still in that concept phase. And so, Valerie, anything else you'd like to add?
Sure. No, that is absolutely correct, Jerry. The board has sat down and started, to try and put something on paper in some of our discussions, and everybody around the table that comes from different backgrounds and different experiences in the appraisal profession starts listing a lot of different things that are important to them in their specific work. So it is definitely a very monstrous task, if you will, to come up with a standard set skills list. But that's why we're looking for ideas from the public. Maybe there's somebody out there that's done something like this or has ideas on how we could standardize such a process.
Yeah. Thanks, Valerie.
Great, thank you both. Finally, somebody would like to know, is there any talk about expanding practicum and PREA programs that are available?
Great question. So I can tell you on the PREA side of it, the board, has on our long list of work to do is to come up with a great outline for PREA and potentially put that into the criteria as well. You didn't see it in this particular exposure draft for the criteria because we had so many things to really work on. But we have had meetings with stakeholders, and I know board members like Valerie have been involved in, really talking about what does a CG PREA program look like. And then with regard to practicum programs, remember, states can certainly approve those programs. They don't have to be approved by the course approval program through AQB, but we certainly offer that capability to review and approve those programs as well. But I don't think that should limit any potential developers that say, well, gosh, I got to get this reviewed by this entity or that entity. Certainly, reviewing through a CAP program could be very beneficial to some, and others that might say, gosh, I only want to offer this program in a certain geographic area. Then okay, well then really maybe that's something that's state focused. But we're super excited to see that the practicum programs are really starting to be more developed. I'll defer to Valerie. Anything else you want to add on the CG PREA?
No, I think you've identified the steps that we've taken to start to create what would be expected in a program like that. It's certainly a large task, because when you think of residential appraisal, it's more specific than certified general appraisal skill sets and tools that you might need to learn and get those experience hours, just because as a CG, you have so many varieties of property types that you can tackle. So it will be a large undertaking, but we would certainly in the future hope that can be built out.
And certainly will be, and if we get to that point once we get to that point, I should say, of having a CG, maybe outline ready, obviously we'll be going through our normal cadence of exposing that with a concept paper so that we can get all of your feedback on that too. So that's something that, as we move further into the year and then even following years, it's something that that we definitely want to work on. So.
Right. Let's go to the exposure draft right now, and specifically the section related to the allowance for those who have had a career following international evaluation standards. Jerry, is there anything you would be able to add at this point to say what you guys have proposed related to the fact that these people are coming to you having followed IVS? Do they have to do anything to demonstrate they understand how to follow USPAP? Because that's what they have to do in the United States under this credential. And how would states review that IVS experience if that's addressed in the exposure draft?
Yeah, sure. It's something that, IVS, we've heard from, many stakeholders that in the IVS community that, gosh, we'd really like to have our experience, count toward, earning a credential here in the U.S. And this is something that we feel has some great merit to it, and which is obviously why it's in the exposure draft. And in terms of the experience itself, the expectation is still that they understand and can apply USPAP, and that they can produce USPAP compliant appraisals. So if they have experience, for example, that in an IVS assignment that mirrors or aligns with USPAP, they'd be able to potentially demonstrate or share that experience as some of the work that they've done. In addition to even producing USPAP compliant appraisals here in the U.S. once they start working here in the U.S. or if they have been working here in the U.S. So we find that in some cases those individuals on the IVS track, or they have that IVS background, they come to us already having worked with maybe a local firm here, a local professional firm here in the U.S., and they're working on getting their experience, but they're saying, "Gosh, I still have a lot of experience. I've got years and years of experience internationally. So if I could get some of that to count, that would really help them move into the profession, or at least a credential sooner." So those are the things we're looking at. And I think the other thing here too is, as we look at that proposal here in the exposure draft, and I hate to flip the script on you, is that what do you feel that looks like as well? I mean, we would like to hear from those on the call, saying, "Hey, look, even the regulators on the call and saying, we think it should be, this, or we think the experience should be able to demonstrate that." In addition to obviously the expectation that it's going to be USPAP compliant. So.
Oh, and Jerry, I
Yeah.
don't know if you want to tell them about the bridge document so people can understand that the board made a very specific decision related to these standards because we have that bridge document.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so that's a key point here. So, within the IVS, they've got some great standards, and they're working internationally. And, we recognize that many of the standards are complementary to the standards that we have and the qualifications we have here in the US. And so we do have a bridge document that helps folks understand, well, how do these two interconnect, and what's equivalent, or what's close to equivalent, or what that might be. So I strongly urge you to look at that bridge document as well. And I'm not sure if we can probably pop that up on the chat as well, just to kind of give you a link to that, if our team on the call can do that, Aida or others.
We have time for one more, I think, here, and that
right.
is, and I'm asking this because I come from a state that does not have a trainee credential, which means there are no requirements, which means we don't have to take continuing education. But the question is, they said, "I don't think CE should be eliminated for trainee appraisers. They are remaining as trainees for some reason. And shouldn't we want trainees to continue their education versus reduce it?" If you had any comments for that.
Sure. I'll add some comments, and if Valerie wants to chime in too. First, if you think about the trainee, classification, they're still learning. In many cases, they're actually taking their qualifying education while they're working and helping and being supervised by an appraiser. And so if we say that they must have continuing education in addition to QE while they're still taking QE, it seems kind of a bit of an overburden. One point I want to make though is, we're not saying that they should stop getting CE. If they want to take CE, I'm all for it. I mean, I take more CE than that's required for the states that I'm credentialed in. So it's just because I'm a constant learner. I want to know as much as I can about my profession to be a better appraiser every day. So yeah, we're not saying that trainee can't take CE. We're just saying that it's something that it shouldn't be a requirement for them. So, and Valerie, anything else to add?
Sure. No, some of the ideas that were discussed when we talked about the trainee and the continuing education portion is we talked about a lot of trainees are trying to continue on the path of credentialing. So they are, in essence, taking that qualifying education that tracks with their experience. And as Lisa mentioned, not all states have a trainee level either. And so those were some ideas that we had discussed, and why our proposal is to remove the continuing education requirements for trainees.
Great points.
Right.
Thank you.
All right, 2 minutes to the hour here. Great job, you guys. Thank you, everybody, for joining us here today. And we're just going to take time to wrap this up really quickly. We encourage you to send in your comments to writing to the board before the deadline of March 3rd. You can click on the link in the chat box to submit your comments to the AQB, but you can always email us as well, aqb@appraisalfoundation.org. I know we have well over, 800 something comments here in the box here today. So super
amazing.
thrilled about that.
Yes,
All right.
absolutely. Thank
Jerry
you.
and Valerie, I
Yes.
turn it over to you to close this out for us.
All right.
Valerie,
Well, we would like to thank you all for your time and engagement throughout our call today. We would love to hear from you in the form of written comments for all of our questions proposed. As Lisa mentioned, please get those in prior to the deadline. Everyone have a great rest of the day. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. We are very much interested in hearing all your informed comments. We do appreciate everything that you've provided here today. Super helpful. As you saw in the chat, we do have we have a public meeting coming up in March. We strongly encourage everybody to sign up and attend that. But please, again, provide us some great detailed comments. Read that exposure draft. Read those 2 concept papers, and then provide us with lots of comments. So again, super thankful. Thank you.
Thank you all. Have a great day.